And for now, we turn to CBS News political contributor Mark Leibovich. Okay, Mark, Mr. Trump, his senior advisor there from the transition, Kellyanne Conway, has said that he's well aware of the current policies concerning China and Taiwan. We know that he's also spoken to Secretaries of State Kissinger and Rice. But what might this call indicate about his foreign policy?
Well, it either indicates one of two things. One, that he is winging it like he spent much of the campaign doing, or there is some, some rhyme or reason behind this. I mean, we just don't know. I mean, Kellyanne Conway seems to indicate that he's aware of the situation and he's going to go have conversations like this anyway, and that's going to be his MO. Maybe the less charitable read is that he was just ignorant to all of this and he just took the call and he just schmoozed with the president of Taiwan for 10 minutes, unknowing, what the consequences could be. So again, I mean, this is part of the continuum of Donald Trump's pattern that he showed in the campaign. He's shown thus far in the transition, and I wouldn't be at all surprised if he shows in his administration.
Is there a way to tell, Mark, whether or not this call, there were people behind the scenes sort of orchestrating this call, or if it was just a call that came through the system and he picked it up and took it?
Yeah, we don't know. I mean, that's something, I mean, obviously we'd all be curious to know. I mean, it would either would be perfectly consistent with precedent in the past, but I mean, my read of this is that, Donald Trump just, did not, turn down the conversation. I mean, I guess the more formal and predictable way of doing something like this would be not to talk to the guy. But again, I mean, without knowing what happened behind the scenes, it's hard to telegraph that.
And switching gears, let's talk about Donald Trump's picks, his cabinet picks. He's gotten a lot of praise for choosing retired General Mattis for Defense Secretary. This is a post traditionally designated for a civilian. So why bring in a general, especially after Mr. Trump's been so critical of generals during the campaign?
Well, that's interesting. I mean, this is sort of another, example of Donald Trump, saying a whole bunch of inflammatory things during the campaign, i.e. the generals failed, they didn't stop ISIS. He said it over and over again, and then all of a sudden, picking a general. And he would probably say, well, this was a good general, and I'm going with him. He was also someone who was supportive of Donald Trump, someone who was very critical of the Obama administration, especially on their Iran policy. So, I mean, he would say that this might be an exception. Maybe David Petraeus is another exception if he becomes Secretary of State. But again, this is sort of also in the category of neverminds that Donald Trump has, he railed against lobbyists during the campaign. His transition was filled with lobbyists at the beginning. Wall Street, Goldman Sachs were both big boogeymen during the campaign. Steve Bannon worked at Goldman Sachs. His new Treasury Secretary appointee, Steve Mnuchin, is a Goldman Sachs alum. So, the question is if this will actually hurt his support, whether his supporters will actually, blame him for being a hypocrite here. That's sort of going to be seen down the road. But no, I mean, the general is in the choose your battle category. We'll see how much traction the Senate gets and how much appetite there is for taking him on.
Earlier this week on CBS This Morning, former Defense Secretary Robert Gates cautioned against too much military influence in the government, and he said it would actually be awkward to have former generals running both the Defense and the State Department. I want to play a bite from that interview.
I think it would be very difficult to have former generals as both Secretary of State and Secretary of Defense. The president will obviously have to make his own choices, but I think that is probably too much military influence in the decision-making process.
Mark, you mentioned retired General David Petraeus, one of the top contenders for Secretary of State. So with General Mattis in the mix, how might that impact Petraeus's odds at the State Department?
My sense is it probably wouldn't impact it that much. I mean, I think Donald Trump would say to what Secretary Gates just said, look, I mean, I'm doing things my own way. I mean, he has shown over and over and again a willingness to buck traditional precedents. Bob Gates is an institutionalist. He is, you could say that he's part of the dreaded establishment. It hasn't stopped Donald Trump from reaching out to him, and they've had meetings over the last few days. But Donald Trump has made no bones about his willingness to sort of forge his own path, and this is another example of that. So I personally think that, I think that the notion of having so many or too many uniform or military people at the top of cabinet positions like this is not something Donald Trump has given a lot of thought about. I'm not sure if it will fit into the calculus of confirmation hearings or any pushback that he would have if Petraeus is nominated.
Okay, let's talk Indiana. Mr. Trump helped broker with a manufacturing plant there effort to keep jobs from moving to Mexico. Critics argue the deal is a really dangerous precedent. Does this just inspire other companies to threaten to leave the U.S. and then get tax breaks in return or some other type of incentive?
It could. It very well could. I mean, that to me is the bulk of the critique that's been levied against this. I mean, you know, if you are a company that's making decisions like this and you see what, you know, whatever deal Carrier got, you can think, you know, maybe I could do pretty well here too. Maybe I could do well for my shareholders, for my employees, for my company, and also for our bottom line. You know, at some point, the administration will have to make decisions on who to actually try to negotiate with and not. I mean, he's already come under a fair amount of criticism from conservatives, including even Sarah Palin yesterday, about, you know, the notion of picking winners and losers, which is one of the most antithetical notions to conservatives everywhere. So we'll see if that becomes a drumbeat over time. You know, in the short term, it certainly was an effective headline for him, and it was the source of a lot of celebration in Indiana this week for him at the rally he did. So we'll see in the short term.
Mark Leibovich in Washington. Thank you, Mark.